The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 16th chapter. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to this man that this manager was squandering his property. So the rich man summoned his manager and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, the manager asked the first debtor, 'How much do you owe my master?' The debtor answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. The manager said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then the manager asked another debtor, 'And how much do you owe?' The debtor replied, 100 containers of wheat. The manager said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in very little is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you've not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters. For a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." The Gospel of the Lord. They took a knee. With only 5 seconds left in the game, only 1 point behind, and on the 1-yard line, the Woodlands High School JV football team took a knee, and they let the clock run out. The play ended, and they gave victory to their opponents. What does it mean that in Texas, of all places, a place where high school football is another religion, a team deliberately and intentionally chooses to lose a game that they could have easily won? Why, when everything that we know about sports and winning says you just don't do that? Well, only 40 minutes prior, in what was going to be the second to last play of the game, a player-to-player collision took place. And it sent a player from the opposing team off the field with an injury that required him to be life-flighted away for emergency care. This was a no-win situation. Celebrating victory would be hollow. And so in losing the game, the Woodland JV high school team won. It was a kingdom moment right there on a football field in Texas. It wasn't how the world works, but it's how the kingdom works. This is God's economy. Now, on the other side of things, there were runners in a marathon in Pennsylvania that got literally stopped in their tracks by a train. The train delayed some runners as much as 9 minutes being added to their time. Now, this race that they were running is a race that they use often to qualify for the Boston Marathon. And that train delay caused many runners' times to fall well below the qualifying standards. Now, officials from the Pennsylvania race appealed on behalf of some of those runners affected by the 9 minutes to be allowed to adjust their time and still qualify for Boston. But Boston officials would not accept the adjusted time, saying, well, how can you really know which runners were affected and therefore need their times adjusted? it's a slippery slope. Well, practically, we do see the Boston officials' argument. I mean, all sorts of delays can pop up in a course from time to time. No special treatment. You win some, you lose some. It's how the world works. Just try again next year. If we apply that attitude to the Texas JV football game, well, then we might hear ourselves saying something like, yeah, it's a tough break. I mean, players do get injured at games. Stuff happens. You win some and you lose some. Don't take the knee, take the win. So now we turn our attention to Jesus and today's parable. It's often titled the parable of the dishonest manager. And it's not exactly one of Jesus' most cut and dry teachings. Lost coins, lost sheep, lost sons. It's much easier to assign roles and apply meanings in parables like that. But this story, not so much. So the question Pastor Randy asked last week, what's God up to in this story, may not be so easy to see or understand. There's the rich man. He has a manager who handles his business dealings, and he gets wind that this manager is squandering his property. Squandering. That sounds familiar. It reminds me of someone, the prodigal son. See, in the parable that Jesus tells right before this one, we hear that the prodigal son was squandering his inheritance, and his father forgives him and welcomes him home. And what was that definition of prodigal that we learned way back when we heard the story this spring? Prodigal meant extravagant and lavish. So if the son squandered and we called him prodigal, well, maybe this could be the parable of the prodigal manager? Anyway, the rich man calls his manager in and he says, "What's this I hear about you? Audit your books. I need to see what you've been up to. I'm not sure I can keep you as my manager anymore." Well, the manager knows he's in trouble. His job is on the chopping block, and he's not cut out for manual labor or the welfare line. What can he do to guarantee something to fall back on when the truth comes out? Okay, so just one more aside here to add to the confusion. But I can't help but wonder, how dishonest is this guy really? I mean, if he was so dishonest, wouldn't he just cook the books and hide what he's doing from his boss a little longer and keep his job? I mean, couldn't he set up a scapegoat and have an underling be his fall guy? Blame it on them? He sounds pretty honest to know that he's going to lose his job and admit that he's not much for hard labor or seeking charity. Maybe he isn't dishonest so much as frugal, not always careful about how he spends the boss's profits. Extravagant, maybe prodigal. Well, anyway, back to it. So the manager devises a plan. He calls in the people who are in debt to his boss, and he adjusts their accounts. Some by 20% and others by as much as 50%. Perhaps the deals he's cutting will earn him some favor with these people when he's out of a job, when he needs a place to stay, when he needs something to eat. Well, the manager's actions get back to the rich man, and he surprisingly commends his manager's shrewdness. The boss has to kind of smile in spite of himself and say, "Yeah, I see what you did there. It's kind of brilliant." Now, we don't know if his boss was so impressed with his shrewdness that the manager kept his job. I mean, the boss is out even more money now that the manager applied all of those generous discounts. I mean, you don't take a knee and win the game, right? Well, maybe Jesus' next words will explain all of this to us. Or maybe they won't. Jesus offers us this: whoever is faithful in the little things is also faithful in the big things. If you can trust someone to keep the storefront swept clean, then you can trust them to keep the accounts balanced. Whoever's dishonest in the little things will also be dishonest in the big things. If your employee has some random excuse every morning when they're 5 minutes late, will he really be ready by the deadline for a big presentation to the customer? So Jesus is drawing a line, dividing up the faithful and the dishonest. Seems simple enough. And then he says the same thing differently. If you can't be trusted with dishonest wealth, who will trust you with true riches? That makes sense too. It's just a different way of saying what he already said. If you can't be trusted with a little, how can you be trusted with a lot? But then it seems like Jesus drew another line there. I mean, between dishonest wealth on one side and true riches on another. And this might be where we get our feathers ruffled a little bit. See, we know what those true riches are. Jesus has described them to us many times before. They're the things that never fade, never rust, never get moth-eaten. True riches aren't possessions that we own or things that we earn, but true riches are gifts we receive from God. Forgiveness, mercy, grace, love, eternal life. That's God's economy, the economy of the kingdom. Where the last are first and the first are last. Where the poor receives good news, where the blind receive their sight, where the captives receive their freedom. So what does that mean? If everything else that's not true riches is what Jesus calls dishonest wealth. I mean, we work hard, right? We come by our finances honestly, we think. We didn't steal, we didn't cheat for them. We earned them fair and square. So how can everything except true riches be dishonest wealth? Well, maybe to understand this, we need to go just a little further. Because Jesus also reminds us that we can't serve two masters. We can't serve God and wealth. Now, the word originally used here is mammon. And mammon wasn't really a word, but it was a name. Mammon was the name of a false god, an idol that represented wealth. So now that might help us out a bit. Because we know wealth and money and financial status and all the stuff we possess, well, that can be an idol. It can be something that rules us. It can be something that holds captive our decisions. But then we know that money isn't the only idol that rules us. I mean, we could put any other idol in its place. We can't serve God and idols. We can't serve God and something that draws our attention from God. We can't deal in the economy of idols and deal in the economy of God. See, if we have to win every time, we can't take the knee. Well, all other idols aside, I think the biggest, most tempting idol we serve is usually ourselves. My most distracting idol is me. What's in my best interest, it can often rule my actions. Now, isn't that what the manager was doing by cutting those accounts down 20 and 50%? Was he really helping those people out, or was he saving his own skin, seeking favor with those who could help him later? It's almost impossible for us to remove ourselves from the equation in whatever we do. It's hard to take the knee. Is that what Jesus was telling us to do? Because then it sounds to me like, well, if we can just try hard enough to be faithful with all this stuff that can be our idol, well, then God will trust us with the true riches. But then the alarm bells start going off in my head because, well, I can't do it. I mean, if you do this, then you get this sort of thing, well, then I'm doomed. Maybe I can be trusted some of the time, but never all the time. Well, at some point, dealing in the economy of our world, I know I'm going to forget who's truly in charge. And I'm going to try to accumulate these less than true riches, and I'm going to try to win more games, and I'm going to try to save my own skin. Can't serve God and me as my own God. None of us can. Now, the great commandment is to love God and love my neighbor. Maybe we can serve God and serve our neighbor. And for you, for me, well, each of us is part of that whole community of creation. So then we know what is God's good intention for the neighbor is also God's good intention for us. So if we all take the knee for each other, well, then the world becomes the kingdom. And isn't that what Jesus did? Jesus took a knee, or rather he took the cross, and he lost so that he could win. Only Jesus didn't lose. See, lose, win, that's language for the world's economy. No, not in God's economy. In God's economy, there is more, so much more. Jesus died and was raised into new life. And in his death, Jesus triumphed. He died and he saved what God loved most, this world, with you and me in it. He turned the world's economy on its head. Jesus reversed it. He toppled it. Jesus had nothing left to lose if he lost us. And so he gave it all. Only he didn't just cut the cost by 50 or 20%. No, he cleared the whole account. Jesus took a knee and he brought us all into the kingdom. Because Christ takes a knee for us, but we take a knee for others. And in the kingdom, when we lose, we win. Amen.